I think something that is somewhat normal for kids growing up is maybe having a tiny crush on their teacher. I know for me, when I was in grade 7, I had a crush on my teacher. A little crush. Honestly, I feel like maybe it's normal or maybe I'm the 1%. You guys can let me know because maybe I was the weird one. The silence is deafening. What I think isn't normal is if your teacher reciprocates those feelings and that teacher ends up getting pregnant twice by her 13-year-old student, then that definitely isn't normal. Today, we're going to be talking about a really interesting case where Mary Kay Letourneau would have a thing for her student, Vili Falau, and she would end up getting pregnant with him. And this case is a lot more different than typical cases. Typically, what should happen is the perpetrator should get caught and be put in jail. And the victim should get, therapy and healing and be able to try to work through this so that they can have a better life. The thing with Mary Kay is she would actually get caught. She would go to jail. Then after she was done with her sentence, she would go and meet up with Vili again and she would marry
Oof.
him. And this case would break headlines in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and honestly, even now. And today, this is the story, and we're going to talk about it. Let me introduce you to our podcast, The Decomposing Flower. I'm Jen. With me is Kira. If you're new here, our podcast is about true crime adjacent. We kind of talk about anything that we find interesting or disturbing. Today's episode, we are going to be talking a lot about abuse, sexual assault, grooming. So, of course, if you're not in the headspace to hear any of that, I totally understand. You can check out another episode of ours, or we will see you guys in another episode. All of the information is online, and we mean no harm to anyone who has been affected by this case or any of our future cases. If we get any information wrong, feel free to let us know in the comments, or if you just want to have a conversation, feel free to talk to us down there. So, to start, let's kind of talk a little bit about Mary Kay Letourneau. She is kind of like your stereotypical perpetrator where she didn't really have a good childhood. And this is not me trying to justify her actions or anything. It just kind of gives you a better insight of who she was. So she grew up in a family that was very extremely conservative, Catholic, Republican. She grew up idolizing her father. John was very heavy into politics, especially the Republican Party, and he actually ran for presidency in 1972, but of course, he didn't win. I actually looked into her dad because I had never heard of him. He was a pretty awful guy, honestly. He was very Republican, racist, misogynistic, and just not really a great guy, which isn't really a shocker when you think about it. Her mom was also a very traditional type of woman. She was very much like a trad wife. She campaigned against equal rights amendments in the 1970s. She had a lot of internalized misogyny and she just really hated women, it seemed like. And she didn't get along with Mary at all. I'm not entirely sure why, if it was just that's kind of how some of those families work. But Mary did have two major life events that happened when she was a kid. For one, she was molested by her brother when she was 7, and nothing really came up of it. I don't think her brother got any consequences. Even Mary in the future would talk about it and she would downplay it. So I just don't think Mary really ever got to truly understand what happened to her. And then when Mary was 11, her family and her were celebrating a party. There were a lot of adults there. And Mary was supposed to watch her younger brother, Philip, who was 3. And unfortunately, Philip would end up drowning in a pool. Obviously, this was an accident, and this was something that was very common, especially in the 70s and the 80s. People drown all the time, especially in front of their loved ones without people realizing it. Her family kind of blamed Mary, which is crazy. Yeah, Mary was 11, but she also was a kid. And it seemed that her parents kind of blamed her for this. I don't know if they did this out of grief or if they just did this because they just were shitty. I don't know. But of course, no one was charged for this because it was an accident. When Mary was a teenager, her entire life changed. She had grown up idolizing her dad. He was this amazing, traditional, Republican, right-wing family man. And then she found out her dad had been having a whole nother life. He had a whole nother family. So after her dad was kind of done with being in politics, he became a professor and he actually got his student Carla pregnant, which is crazy, actually. It seems like the apple didn't fall too far from the tree, although I believe Carla was over the age of 18, but of course, there's still the power dynamic there. So he had multiple kids with Carla, and obviously this was very problematic, but this really destroyed Mary's view of her dad because she viewed him as this great Christian, traditional family man, and now he had a bunch of kids that were her half siblings. He kind of did the very stereotypical thing that these men do is they cheat on their wives and then they get mad at their mistress because she got pregnant. Apparently, he was very shitty to Carla and he was very abusive and neglectful to the children. I don't even think he really cared about those children. I'm not 100% on that, but he did end up staying with Mary's mom, and I think he just kind of abandoned Carla, honestly. So after Mary graduated high school, she would end up going to Arizona State University, where she would meet her husband, Steve Letourneau, at a college party. They were pretty much what I would consider a situationship. They weren't really that into each other. From what it seems, he wasn't the type of guy that Mary would go for. But they both kind of, they hooked up, and immediately she got pregnant at 20 years old. This wasn't really ideal for them because they're 20. I don't think they really liked each other that much to want to have kids. They both came from really traditional families. And because of that, their parents were like, you guys need to get married because you can't have a baby out of wedlock. So they would end up getting married in 1985. They would end up dropping out of university and they would end up moving to Alaska where Steve's parents were, and Steve would get a job working for Alaska Airlines. They both struggled a lot. For one, they were very young and they have a baby. They didn't get the proper education they wanted. They also, I don't think, really liked each other. Apparently, Steve was known for cheating on Mary. They just had a very rocky relationship. They would go on to have 4 kids, and then eventually Steve would actually get a job transfer in Seattle, and they would take their kids and fly over to Seattle. And Mary, at this point, decided that she wanted to get a degree in education and become a teacher. So she would begin teaching at Shorewood Elementary School. The thing about Mary is she was actually a really good teacher. Many students, parents, other teachers praised her for how well she taught these kids. And this is where she would meet her victim, Vili Falau, when he was in 2nd grade. Vili came from a broken home. There isn't a whole lot on his parents, except for the fact that his parents were Polynesian immigrants, and his dad was known to have multiple different children from different women, and his mom was a single mom working 2 jobs. In some sources, it did say that he was abusive to the family, although some sources, they said that wasn't true. Honestly, it's kind of hard to tell, but it wouldn't be uncommon. And so Vili was kind of like your ideal victim because he didn't really have his parents around because his mom was busy working. He just had a little bit more freedom, if that kind of makes sense. Vili was very creative. He was really into art and poetry. And Mary saw this talent in him and she wanted him to excel in this. And she kept telling Vili to pursue this skill. I don't think there's anything entirely wrong if a teacher sees that a student is really good at something and they want them to tap into that skill, but it feels like Mary was already getting a little weird. So after the 2nd grade, Mary would stay in contact with Vili. She was kind of a family friend to his mom. Also, her oldest son was a year older than Vili, and he was good friends with him. And so he would kind of hang out with their family. He would tag along to Alaska. They would just hang out. She would buy him supplies, take him out to museums, take him out for dinner, kind of be in his life here and there. It wasn't until Mary was promoted to teach grade 5 and grade 6 when she would become Vili's grade 6 teacher in 1995. And this is honestly when things changed. She started to spend more time with Vili. She was taking him out for dinner. She was mentoring him, helping him with his grades. And they were also spending a lot of time during lunch. He was kind of always with her at lunch. And of course, he developed a crush on her. He's your typical 12-year-old boy. She was a pretty blonde woman. And of course, he's going to crush on his teacher. It's a little common. But what wasn't really normal for this was the fact that Mary was seeming to love this attention and she was reciprocating it. Even other teachers noticed this and noticed how her relationship with Vili wasn't a mentor or a teacher, but more like a girlfriend. I don't know exactly what that means. If they were just noticing that she was giggling a lot or what, I don't really know. Definitely already the red flags were there. In 1996, Mary had a miscarriage, unfortunately, and this showed a lot of strain on her marriage with Steve. Because of this, she started to spend more time in her career teaching, and she was spending more time with Vili. And during the summer, she would have Vili spend a lot of time. Now, again, Vili was good friends with her son, so it wasn't, to the outside eye, it didn't seem that odd that he was hanging out with his teacher all the time. It was almost like that's just his friend's mom who happens to be his teacher. But Vili was kind of like your average, typical art kid. He's really good at the creative arts, but he's not really that great at school. And so Mary was really helping him do better in his academics, and he actually started to do really well in his grades. She wanted to take him out for dinner to be like, hey, congrats, you're doing really well. But she really wanted to treat Vili alone. The very first, well, I would say like one of the major red flags would happen in June of 1996. Apparently, Mary had taken Vili out for dinner alone. Her husband wasn't home. I believe her kids weren't home as well. And after this dinner, Mary and Vili would drive alone at night and they would pull into a parking spot. Around 1 in the morning, a police officer would notice this car just parked and they could notice some movement in the car and notice this woman climbing into the front seat. So obviously this police officer is like, okay, I gotta check this out. So he knocks on the window. He notices Vili is in the back sleeping. They both had clothes on and it didn't seem like anything was going on, but it just seemed weird. And so they both gave fake names and Vili also said he was 18. Now, a lot of people said that Vili did look 18. In my opinion, he does look a little older than 12, 13, but he doesn't look like an adult to me. But that's really besides the point. Whether he looks like an adult or not, he was still a minor. The officer could kind of like get the feeling like something was wrong. And so he would ask for their ID and they wouldn't give him an ID. Obviously, because this would have shown that Vili was in fact 12, he probably didn't even have an ID. Mary tried to say that she got into a fight with her husband and that she ended up spending the night with a family friend who was Vili. But the officer was like, okay, well, if you're not going to give me your IDs, I'm going to have to arrest you guys. So once they were taken to the police station, they would realize that Vili was in fact 12 years old. And so they would call his mom and his mother Suna would arrive. She was actually able to confirm that this was Mary. She was kind of a family friend, but she was his teacher and he was supposed to be at the house anyways because he was having a sleepover. Mary tried to lie again, saying that what actually happened was that Steve and her got in a fight and that Vili was really uncomfortable, so they left the house and they went driving. This doesn't even make any sense to me because hypothetically, if I was married and my son was having a sleepover with his friend and I got in a fight with my husband and my son's friend is uncomfortable, I would just be like, okay, we're going to call your mom and your mom can come pick you up. Like, clearly this wasn't what happened, and obviously we know that now. It seemed like Mary was trying to downplay all of it, and the charges were dropped because it seemed like a big misunderstanding. I do want to say that Suna was a single mom. She was working multiple jobs and she trusted Mary. And, this is the 90s. There wasn't a whole lot of information on identifying these things, especially when the perpetrator is a woman. So I do want to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room. And that fact is that Mary is a pretty white woman and Vili is a Polynesian boy. And unfortunately, at this time period, a lot of boys who looked like Vili were heavily sexualized and were seen to be more sexual than their white peers. I mean, this is a completely different case, but when you look at like Jeffrey Dahmer and when he had his victim that was a boy from Asia, and they literally had proof that he was killing this kid and they just didn't believe it, and that was a 14-year-old boy, it just feels like the warning signs were in their face and they just did not want to take this serious at all. And I don't know if it was just them being straight up discriminatory or they just didn't want to see it or if it's just because Mary was very pretty. I don't know. But it really is astonishing, honestly. The first time that they would be intimate, and by intimate, I mean the first time Vili was raped by Mary was when he was 13 years old. They apparently had sex on the roof of her house, which is generally crazy. Vili would talk about this as if he consented. And same thing with Mary in the future. Even though he's 13, he cannot consent because he's 13. You can't consent at all. And they would later talk about this like, oh, well, when you're together, you want to have sex with your partner. And it's like, yeah, when you're not a child and that's not your
Uh-huh.
teacher. Generally crazy. So Mary ended up getting pregnant in September of 1996. I don't know if she told her husband or if she told Vili, but she kind of kept it under wraps. But the truth came out in February of 1997 when Steve found a love letter from Mary to Vili. He was very angry at this, and I don't know if he was more angry at the fact that Mary was having a relationship with a minor or if that she was cheating. Because apparently Steve actually went to Vili, and instead of going to Vili and being like, hey, you're a victim, we need to get you help, I'm gonna call the police, he told Vili to stay away from Mary, as if he's just like another man that she's cheating on him with. Like, this is a child. I don't know. That is generally so crazy to me. If I ever had a partner and I found that out, I would be calling the police and running.
So wild to be like, hey, you better stay away from my girl who's 42 and you're 12. Like,
Yeah, and the fact that, like, their oldest son was just a year older than Vili and they had other kids, like, I would be so concerned that they're doing something to my children or I don't know, it's just, like, so crazy. Apparently, he had been talking about this to a family friend because he didn't even report this to the police. And it wasn't until this family friend or it was a relative ended up calling the police to say, "Hey, Mary is having sex with a child. You guys need to look into this." And so a month after she was caught on March 4th, 1997, Mary would be arrested while she was at the school. And while she was awaiting her sentence, she gave birth to her very first daughter. Obviously, this child was given to the custody of Suna because Vili is a child. He can't really have the custody. What's even more crazy about this is they wanted to sentence her for 6.5 years, but she was given a plea deal. Basically, if she would just admit that she did it, she would only have to go to jail for 3 months. Originally, it was going to be 6 months. Then she only spent 3 months. And she was released because she was considered not a danger or a flight risk. And she just was not allowed to teach anymore. She couldn't be around her children, and she had a no contact order with Vili. And she didn't even have to register as a sex offender, which is so crazy to me. Like, I don't get that. She just had to attend a sex offender treatment plan, and that was that. Apparently, after she was out, she was talking to her friends about how Vili was the love of her life, that it wasn't really a crime because she loved him. It wasn't like she was this perpetrator. I don't know about you, but if I had a friend who said any of these things or even got caught and admitted to it, I would have them blocked everywhere. Obviously, Steve would divorce her and he would pack up the rest of their kids and he would move back to Alaska where his parents lived and he'd become a single father. He did go on to get remarried, I believe, and I think he kind of just had nothing to do with her since then. She would later reconnect with her children when they were older, but I don't think they ever really had that relationship again. I don't think I could ever have a relationship with my mom if she
uh-huh.
did this. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. You could definitely see where she was manic, but she wasn't a sex offender because she had bipolar. She was just a sex offender with bipolar. I don't want to add to the stigma that people with bipolar are off doing these awful things. Not even a month after she got out of jail, she had been caught in February of 1998 in her car with Veely very close to his house. She tried to say she was alone, but they were like, we can see him. And of course, they found evidence that her and Veely had been meeting up the entire time that she was out of jail. And she actually got pregnant a second time during this. They recognized her because this had become a tabloid nightmare, and they were like, oh shit, that's Mary Kay, the teacher. And so they obviously were arresting her. They would end up finding evidence that they had been having sex in the car, that there was over $6,200 in her car, which was relevantly about 12,000 today. And she also had some men's clothes in there that she tried to say they were her clothes, that she just liked wearing men's clothes, but they were obviously Veely's. And she also had baby clothes in there that she tried to say were from her friends and stuff, which is, it's just so obvious. Like, she was breaking the rules and her plea agreement. And so, of course, she was arrested and the judge would revoke her plea agreement. She would be sentenced to 7.5 years, and she actually gave birth to their second child that year, and that child would be given also to the custody of Suna. I think 7.5 years is honestly not enough. She would end up co-writing a book with Veely that is called Only One Crime, Love.
What the fuck?
I know. It was published in France. I believe she tried to get it published in the US and they were like, no. But what kind of corny ass fanfic title is this? Like, girl, pack it up. It generally is so cringy, and obviously I'm not making fun of Veely at this time because he was a teenager, but the fact that she tries to write it off like, oh, the crime is love. It's like, no, ma'am, the crime is pedophilia. You're a rapist.
Yeah, the crime is grooming children, please.
Honestly. She would also write another book with someone that was called If Loving You Is Wrong. Really didn't have any connection with this book, but again, this woman just loved sharing her fucking story. She was hated in jail. She was really sassy with the guards. She wouldn't want to do any work. She got caught trying to write letters and connect with Veely even though she wasn't supposed to. And she would do a lot of interviews while she was in prison. She kind of came across a little bit as a narcissist, and obviously I'm not going to diagnose her, but she just was really all about her and the attention. Apparently, according to one of her friends, she was always obsessed with how she looked and her picture to the outside public. So in her house, it would be perfect, everything where she was, but then where her kids were, it would just be messy, mismatched furniture. And of course, I know like your kids are going to be messy, of course. But they said it was like she just didn't care about how her kids were. It's just how she looked. And so she just always thought about herself. I mean, for one, she didn't even think about how this was going to affect Veely being a victim. She didn't think about how this was going to affect her kids. She didn't even give a shit about the children in this story and the victims. And like, she just kind of was like, oh, it's not my fault that I fell in love with him. I can't help who I fall in love with.
Yeah, no, ma'am, you absolutely can. Because you're not supposed to fall in love with a 12-year-old. That's just not a thing. Ugh, the children, sorry. The children in the story. For her just to like, yeah, here you go, grandma. Here you go. Keep enjoying them.
Oh my God. And it's just like, it's so crazy that she just kind of didn't see a problem with it at all. People found her interesting because she never was like saying, oh, I'm innocent, or I didn't do these things, or admitting to the crimes. She was more so just like, is it really that bad that I fell in love and that's it? It's not my fault. You can't stop that. And it's like, girl, what the hell?
It's like, girl, you're living in some kind of a delusion here. And like, I feel like she's just a terrible fucking person to be like, oh, first of all, they're doing stuff in the car and being like, no, he's not here. As he's like in the back seat, like, hi.
I generally don't like saying this, but she is delusional in the way she thought. Of course, this took a massive toll on Veely. He was struggling as a teenager because he doesn't get to live the normal teenage experience. He's growing up with his two daughters, but he's still like the dad to them, but he's not the dad because it's like a weird situation there. And he would end up dropping out of high school at 16. And He apparently struggled a lot with his mental health, like I said. He would attempt to take his life in 1999, and I don't think he ever really got the proper help. His family did sue the school district for emotional damages and loss of wages and how they didn't protect Vili, but I don't think they were ever awarded any money because I'm sure the school was able to be like, "That's not our fault," even though the teacher should have been clocking this.
Yeah.
Mary would be released from prison on August 4th, 2004. She would be registered as a medium sex offender. And not long after, Vili would go to the court and ask him to reverse the no contact order because he was now 21. The following few months, in May of 2005, he would marry her. He was 22. I'm not entirely sure how his family took this. I do know that his mom was very affected by the fact that Mary had abused her son, but she said that when she was taking care of her grandchildren, they would ask her things like, "Do you love my mommy? Do you hate her?" And she would say, like, "How do I tell these young girls I hate your mom?" And so I think there was this battle for the mom not knowing how to really deal with that. Because this isn't just a story where Mary assaulted him and that Vili understood that he was a victim and then they tried to get help. It's like he then married her. They would do a lot of interviews because of this, because obviously they did. They were in so many interviews talking about how they were in love and how they were getting married and how she wasn't really a perpetrator, even though she was. And Vili was very interesting because he always blamed himself in a way. He would talk about how he always had a crush on her and that he really wanted her. And of course, he thought she was hot. And he never really believed he was a victim, which is really sad. I do think part of it is that, one, he probably was groomed into thinking those, but also there wasn't and still isn't a lot of resources for boys that are victims of rape. And so I do want to say I will be leaving some links in the description for anyone that needs help if you are going through this, or maybe this is something that has affected you, especially if you are a man and you don't really have anyone to talk to. There will be links down below. Vili never saw himself as a victim. He actually hated when he would be referred to as a victim. I think maybe part of it was that he did love Mary, and obviously sometimes victims don't know how to cope with this. They sometimes love their abuser, there's Stockholm syndrome, but also it could just be that he has been groomed and gaslighted into believing that Mary loves him when really she was just a perpetrator and a vile human being. I know that he said he hated being referred to as a victim, but I do think there is a huge difference between someone not wanting to be called a victim. Some people prefer to be called a survivor, but then there's also people who just don't believe they're a victim. And I think that he kind of didn't think he was because in a lot of interviews that they would do, Mary would constantly in these interviews say things like, "Oh yeah, he wanted me in the beginning of our relationship. He was all over me." And it's like, "Girl, you're talking about him when he was 12 and you were 36. This is not like, oh, when we were started dating when we were in college." It's like you're talking about your student who's a child. She would blame him. She would humiliate him a lot in these interviews. The way she would talk about him to these interviewers, "Oh, he just wanted me. He was all over me. He was trying to sleep with me and he wanted all that." It's like, girl, like, I think she's honestly the reason that he didn't think that he was a victim because she probably was like, "Oh no, you were pursuing me." And even if a child does pursue an adult, it's still the adult's problem. They're the one who needs to set the boundaries. They need to make sure that child understands that can't happen. You can't blame a child. That's crazy.
Exactly. That's why you're an adult. You need to take ownership, set those boundaries rather than being like, "Oh, no, he was 12 and he was obsessed with me." Like, he's a 12-year-old boy.
Yeah, brain's not even developed. It's just so crazy. So Mary and Vili would go on to stay married for over 12 years. They would end up getting separated in 2017 because Vili was actually wanting to run a legal weed dispensary, but you can't have a criminal history and your spouse can't. And of course, with Mary having, a record, they had to separate. But they did end up getting a divorce in 2019. I don't really know exactly what led up to it. I do know is that as he got older, he started to really realize what happened to him. He did say that he would never want his daughters to go through this or any of his kids. And I think he was probably getting to that place where he was like, oh shit, I was a victim. Obviously, I'm not going to speak for him at all. He would end up staying in good contact with her. It seems like the family was always in good contact, like his daughters and Mary and him. They seemed what looked like a normal family from the outside. But in 2020, Mary would be diagnosed with cancer, and Vili would take care of her in the end until she would die in June. I do think that shows a lot of who Vili is as a person, is that he still cared for her and that he still wanted to help her even in her dying days. According to a source in the People's Magazine, someone who's close to Vili did say that he realizes now like how dangerous and how unhealthy it was, and that he has been trying to do better now. He's got to be in his like early 40s, I believe, and I'm not really too sure where he's at. He's been kind of out of the public since she died. It seems like Mary was the one that was wanting to do all these interviews and not him. He's been fairly quiet. I know that his daughter, she recently had a baby, I think in 2023, and I believe he's in a new relationship now. And I really honestly hope that for everyone in this family, Mary's kids, Vili's kids, that everyone has been able to cope and realize how unhealthy this was. And I really hope Vili doesn't blame himself. And I hope he realizes that she was not a good person. But obviously, I'm not Vili and I can't tell him how to feel, of course. And honestly, I just hope for everyone that they have been able to heal in some kind of way. But that's where we're at for today's episode. Let me know what you guys think about this case. I don't hear a whole lot of people talk about it. Thank you so much for listening. I hope I explained this with as much empathy as I could, and we will see you guys next week.